Welcome to a new episode about drawing and animation. Today we will focus on answering a question that we have all asked ourselves when we start animating our scenes and characters. Every animator or digital artist knows deep inside that there is always something that can be improved. But sometimes finding that detail becomes something unattainable, and we ask ourselves, how can I give more life to this character? How can I improve an action? Or how can I give more emotion to the scene? Well, you are not alone. We all go through these moments at some point. And yeah, that is why today we are going to solve these great animation dilemmas. Keep in mind that what we will talk about today applies to any type of animation, and it doesn't matter what software you are using. The holy grail that we will talk about today is the famous book written by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston in 1981 called Disney Animation: The Illusion of Life. Frank and Ollie were members of the legendary group called the Nine Old Men, a group of animators who worked at Disney Studios from 1920 to 1980. But you might be wondering, what does this book have to do with your animations? Well, if you're interested in improving your technique, the movements of your characters, and in creating more fluid and realistic animations, believe me, this book is one of the most complete you can find. This book contains the fascinating philosophy of all animation, which is expressed in the so-called 12 basic principles. So get ready, because today we will talk about each of these principles. It is important to mention that these principles are extremely important for every animator. But within the world of animation, there are many animators to highlight, such as Yutaka Nakamura, a master known as the grandfather of action animation, who will surely be familiar to all anime lovers. If you would like a video analyzing his work, let me know in the comments, because believe me, there is a lot to talk about. So yep, if you are just starting out in the world of animation, this video will definitely serve as a guide to solving problems from the most basic to the most complicated ones. The first principle, and perhaps one of the most used, is the squash and stretch technique. A technique where we combine three important points: weight, elasticity, and impact. This opened the door to timing and anticipation. Because if timing is what gives us time and fluidity, the anticipation of an action could give us a gag. And I bet you still remember this one, but this is how the exercise called the bouncing ball was born. We already talked about this exercise in another video, so if you want to check it out, I will leave the link in the description. Squash and stretch are techniques that are used a lot in the animation process. Who doesn't remember seeing a character get crushed or scream in an exaggeratedly funny way? This principle is exactly about that. For example, in the case of a character, it is applied at the precise moment of the action. And as we know, exaggerating expressions is an impressive way to create fluidity, transmit an emotion, and the most important, generate a reaction in the viewer. The second principle is anticipation. Anticipation helps us create tension by giving the audience time to react and prepare for the animation that is about to happen. For example, let's imagine a character who is about to jump. Before creating the jump, we know that the character must first crouch down before pushing all his weight up, and that is why we must make this movement fluid. So that means that we cannot go from a normal vertical position to jumping, because that would look a little bit weird. We must keep in mind that the stronger the anticipation movement, the more cartoonish and fluid the animation will be. Basically, this principle will make your animations look more fluid and real, and of course, this will make the audience identify more with what is happening in the scene. Now, let's talk about staging. Staging is the way you prepare the whole scene, from the placement of the characters, the lights, to the elements of the background and the foreground. All of this will depend on the characters and the feeling you want to convey in the scene. A good practice for this principle is to know the camera shots and to know how to create storyboards. If you are interested in a video about how to create storyboards for animations, just let me know that in the comments so we can talk more about it. Now, what would happen if we don't have good staging? Well, without this, our characters would be completely lost, as well as the linearity of the story. And this would cause confusion in the spectators. That is why you really must focus on what you want to communicate to the audience. avoiding unnecessary details in the scenes and actions. Straight ahead and pose to pose. So here we'll find two different ways to animate an action. The first one, the straight ahead technique, requires animating the whole action, but with one detail. It must be done in sequential order. Now the pose to pose technique is a little bit more complex because it involves drawing the key poses first, which are the first and last drawing of an animation. But in these cases, it is also very common to add some other images in between that will help you as a guide, mainly for really complex movements. Once you have these 3 or 4 key drawings, you just simply complete the entire sequence by adding all the intermediate drawings to have more fluidity. For example, fire, water, and other fluid elements are often animated using the straight ahead technique, and actions that require tight structure or timing are often animated using the pose to pose. Follow-through and overlapping action. Follow-through and overlapping action are two animation techniques that emphasize 3 types of actions: motion, momentum, and inertia. The follow-through principle, for example, it refers to the notion of that when a character stops, there are different parts of the body that will continue to move for a few seconds before reaching the final resting positions. This is a fundamental animation technique used to simulate inertia. It refers to the natural delay that occurs when parts of a character's body or object continue to move, even after the main action has stopped. On the other hand, we have the overlapping action. This one is very similar but executed differently. Overlapping action refers to the idea that different parts of a body or object will move at different speeds. In real life, nothing moves all at once. For example, when a character turns their head, the torso moves first, followed by the neck, then the head, and finally the hair or any loose clothing. All these overlapping elements create a smooth, flowing movement that feels more convincing than a rigid mechanical motion. Slow in and slow out. We already talked about this exercise in another video, so if you want to check it out, I will leave the link in the description. So, this animation principle refers to how all movements begin slowly, build momentum, and then finish slowly. Basically, easing in and easing out of the action. This means that when the action starts, we have more drawings near the starting pose, 1 or 2 in the middle, and more drawings near the final pose. Slow ins and slow outs soften the action, making it more lifelike. But we have to remember that these days, and mostly if you are using bones in Moho, to achieve slow in and slow out is a matter of changing the motion curves. Again, the bouncing ball exercise is a good practice for those who are just starting out. I once read something that said, "Life moves in arcs and robots move in angles." But what does this really mean? We know that all living things have joints that allow them to bend and flex, and when they move, they do it in curves instead of rigid straight lines. Using arcs in your animation will add that amazing touch of realism you're looking for. But what's the difference between this principle and the slow in and slow out? The slow in, slow out talks about the fluidity of a movement at the beginning and end of an action, while the arc principle tells us about the fluidity that exists during an action. That is why it is so important to create a storyboard, have sketches, and prepare everything that is necessary before starting to draw an animation. Secondary action. Secondary actions are all those that accompany the main action in a scene. They are like the small gestures, expressions, or movements that give more life to the character and the scene. For example, if your character is eating, the main action will be taking a bite, but the secondary actions would be their expression, the way they chew, the movement of their arms, hair, and everything that influences the main action. These actions give more personality to our character, and these details are the ones that empathize with the audience. We usually remember small details about our favorite characters. These small details are usually small secondary actions, and we remember them because we tend to identify ourselves with many of them. It is very important to make these details very clear when we are writing a script, detailing a scene, or drawing an expression. Timing. If we're going to talk about animations, of course we have to talk about timing because time influences every action we create. And this is an amazing thing, because as a principle, it affects several factors. Imagine that you are working on an animation. To do that, you have to pay attention to the speed, the way the actions overlap, and of course you also have to animate the secondary objects. All that, every little detail will always depend on time. Just remember that timing will always influence three things: characterization, mood, and narration. And this is funny because we usually have an innate notion of how things move, so it is perhaps more important to know how to detect problems. Let's imagine a character who sits down or throws an object. There are three things we need to pay attention to: narrative timing, which would be the action; mechanical timing, which defines strength; and rhythmic timing, something that Disney artists are experts at, since you have to be very detailed to create something that is visually interesting, pleasing to the eye, with fluidity and personality. This technique is super important to communicate an emotion and a message through an action. Exaggeration. Exaggeration amplifies certain aspects of the movement, such as its size, shape, and rhythm. That means that it can highlight or emphasize certain characteristics of the action, giving greater appeal and emphasis to the desired movements. For example, if the character is sad, make the character look more sorrowful. If the character is having fun, make the character look brighter. And if it's nervous, just make it look shakier. It is important to understand that exaggeration does not make the action less believable. It instead makes the action look more convincing. That's why, if we notice that the animation lacks exaggeration, many fans would find it difficult to connect with the characters and the scenes. Exaggeration is the attraction of movement, and we must understand that to make each movement clear and convincing. Solid drawing animation. This principle is about the process of adding height, depth, and weight to a drawing to make it look believable on a 2D surface. Of course, we've all drawn something in 3Ds at some point without realizing it. But mastering this technique is super important to give more realism to what we draw, and to do this, we must talk specifically about our way of drawing. In the case of Moho, we can program small rotations with bones to generate this effect without having to work with the frame-by-frame technique. By understanding the basics of 3D shapes, such as light, shadow, and anatomy, you will be able to draw better characters and convey emotions on a more realistic level. And it doesn't matter if you're working with a minimalist character or with something super complex, it's essential to know how to express a character's feelings and create an animation that isn't slow or boring. For those who want to learn more about drawing, or for those who just want to brush up on all this, I recommend checking out Andrew Loomis's Principles of Shapes and Geometry. This will give you a better idea about how to start creating all kinds of amazing characters. Appeal. Appeal is an important principle of animation, as it allows us to connect with the characters we create and their story. And not only that, we also connect with the audience, and that is what we are looking for. You can achieve this by highlighting certain facial features, physical attributes, or simple movements. But there is a small detail. This does not only apply to the main characters, this applies to every character we create. All must have an attribute that makes them memorable. How many times have we seen secondary characters have great appeal, like Maximus from Tangled, Doris from Finding Nemo, or Timon and Pumbaa from The Lion King? All of them had a great connection with the viewers, and that is what we should always look for when we are creating a character, whether it is a hero, a secondary character, or a villain. Even if they have been conceived to be villains, they have to connect with the audience. We all know that deep down they must be feared and hated. But on the other hand, our curiosity does not stop there. Villains represent the dangerous, the unattainable, and the forbidden. And that attraction to what we know is bad deeply intrigues us and traps us. That is why these characters become memorable. There are certain steps to follow when we are creating a hero or a villain. If you are interested in knowing how to create a villain, an anti-hero, or other characteristics that will be part of the attitude and essence of our characters, just let me know in the comments so we can talk about it in another video. But yeah, that's appeal. Something difficult to apply and almost impossible to define is like we have to look for the soul of a character to make it memorable. And if we can do that, reach that level, the audience will connect with them so much that they will be remembered maybe for a lifetime. Just imagine someone asking you, what was your favorite cartoon as a child? If you close your eyes, surely more than one will come to mind, and you will surely remember some incredible scenes, and that is exactly what we must look for when we work on our characters, details that make them unique. These 12 principles we saw today are a guide for those who are starting out in the world of animation, and also a reminder that everything we do when we animate or create characters, everything has a meaning and an explanation. Never forget that. These are 12 extremely important principles, but as we know, each animator has his own style. So if you are interested in other types of animation, such as Yutaka Nakamura's, or other types of drawings, just let me know in the comments, because there are many styles we could talk about. If you enjoyed this video, kindly hit the subscribe button to stay tuned for more content and to help me with the channel. And if you have Instagram, you can also find me there. For those who are new to this channel, thanks so much for being there. And for those who are already part of this family, thanks for your support and interest in the world of drawing and animation. I hope to see you all in the next one with more information about Moho, digital drawing, animation, and more. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.